Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we're back with another episode of Cheap Shots. This series showcases how to quickly and cheaply paint up miniatures in the wargaming hobby, and on today's episode we're going to show you guys how to quickly and cheaply paint up the Traitor Guard available in Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress. As you can see, this will be the end result with a beautiful tabletop standard, and by following the recommended tips, techniques, and materials that we suggest using our Cheapskate method, you can paint this entire squad for the low price of $32.62, and that's assuming that you're buying everything for the very first time from Walmart as well as Hobby Lobby. Now when you compare that with the materials you need to buy from Citadel and Army Painter, you're talking about a grand total savings of $181.48. As you can see in this picture, if you'll notice, the Traitor Guard are actually divided into two different groups with two very different paint schemes, and the reason why is because I'm planning on taking one half of the Traitor Guard and combining it with the half of the Blooded Kill Team box set available in Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team, and that way I have two different groups of Chaos Hell Cultists that we can use in Necromunda. One is dedicated to Slaanesh, while the other one is dedicated to Khorne. So with that being said, let's go and talk about quickly and cheaply how to paint up your Traitor Guardsmen for your games of Warhammer Quest. So in order to create this kill team, the first thing you do, of course, is to assemble, texture, as well as prime your miniatures. Now for my miniatures, these are all actually push fits, so these were very quick to assemble, and afterwards I had to texture the bases. And to do the texturing, what I like to use is a combination of wood glue as well as sand. I just paint the part of the base that I want to have texturing on with wood glue, and I dust it with some sand that I get from my backyard garden. Now once it dries, what I do is I put a sealant on it using a combination of 50% water as well as 50% wood glue, and I make it into a slurry and apply it directly onto the texturing and let it dry. What this does, it creates an airtight seal for the texturing to make sure it doesn't flake off the bases. And the last thing I do, of course, is to prime the miniatures in Rust-Oleum's flat white primer that I get my local Walmart for $3.99. Now the reason why you do priming is for a couple of reasons. The first reason why is so that way your acrylic paints have a good surface to adhere to. Unfortunately, if you were to paint your acrylics onto bare plastic, any slightest form of friction would cause the paint to be removed from your miniature and it would absolutely ruin the finish. So because that primer kind of fixes that problem. The second thing that primer also does is that the color of the primer that you use has a big impact on the vibrancy of the colors that you have in your miniatures. Traditionally speaking, if you're going for a more vibrant and colorful paint job, you want to go with a lighter primer, whereas for a darker paint job, you go with a darker toned primer. In this case, since I'm using an oil wash for my miniatures, I'm going to go with a very bright and vibrant paint job, so I go with a flat white primer. So once you're done painting the miniatures, what you gotta do now, of course, is to paint the flesh. Now luckily there's not much flesh being exposed on these miniatures, but I did want to create a variety of skin tones in my miniatures, so because I painted half the squad in flesh by Albemarle paint, you get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents, and the other half I did in nutmeg brown for a darker skin tone, which I also got at Walmart for about 50 cents as well. Just put two thin layers of whatever flesh that you want to be for the flesh tones, and then once it's dry, next thing you do is move on to a dry brush. So for the guys that I paint up in flesh, I use Delton Sarin Coats Peaches and Cream, and get this cut at my local Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents. And then for the guys I did in Nutmeg Brown, I decided to dry brush their flesh in flesh by Albemarle paint, which costs 50 cents at my local Walmart. And once again, what dry brushing does, it creates the illusion of depth on your miniatures, because when you dry brush your miniature, the pigments of paint actually adhere to the raised surfaces of the miniature while leaving those darker colors in the recesses. This creates the illusion of depth on your miniatures. It also adds a nice little highlight to your miniatures as well. Now there will be a little bit of a chalky kind of pastel finish with your miniatures if you do a dry brush, but don't worry if it does. The reason why is because when we do an oil wash, it's going to smooth out those transitions and that chalky texture is going to go away. Now the next detail we're going to work on are the uniforms that these characters are wearing, and like I said before, I'm going to divide this group into two different halves. The guys on the left hand side I'm going to dedicate to Slaanesh, so I'm going to paint their trousers in a pewter gray by Albemarle paint. That costs 50 cents at your local Walmart. And the reason why I'm painting their trousers gray is because I'm going to paint their tops in different shades of blue to show that they're aligned with Slaanesh. Now the guys on the right hand side, however, are going to be members of the Blood Pact, which is a Khornate warband that's dedicated to the Blood God. So for their uniforms, I'm going to pick that on two thin layers of Anita's pure True Acrylic in True Red. This costs 65 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. I'm going to put two thin coats on all the parts of the uniform that I want to be red, and then from there, of course, we're ready to continue on our next detail on the uniforms. So the main detail I'm focusing on are for the guys' tops on those niche side specifically. I'm using three different colors for those guys. I'm using Bright Blue by Albemarle paint as well as Tuscan Teal. You can get these two colors at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. And then I'm also using a bright teal color that's made by Tahitian Blue by Delta Sarin Coat. I get this stuff from my local Walmart for about 65 cents. And this is going to go directly for those niche dedicated members of the warband. All I do is I pick out different colors of jackets in dark teal, light teal, as well as blue to kind of show that these guys are allied with the Great Deceiver. So now that I'm done with those tops and those uniforms, next thing you do now is to dry brush the uniforms. Now for the guys whose coats I painted in various shades of blue, I'm going to dry brush their coats with Dutch Aqua by Folk Art, cost 75 cents at my local Walmart. Just going to do a once quick over with the dry brushing so that way I can illustrate the folds of the fabric while creating highlights on their uniforms as well. Now for the guys I've done in red, I'm going to do a dry brush with Tropic Orange by Apple Paint. You can get this stuff at my local Walmart for about 50 cents. Just do a quick dry brush on the red uniforms, add that additional layer of highlighting with that bright orange, and now we're ready to move on to the leather goods. So next detail we're going to work on are the boots that these guys are wearing, and for the boots I use 2 thin layers of Anita's acrylic moccasin brown. It's a nice kind of light brown tan color that looks really nice, especially when you do oil washing to it. I just put 2 thin layers of this stuff on all the boots for both squads, regardless of what members or what Chaos God they're dedicated to. And once we're done with that, the next thing we'll work on is on the body armor. Now, once again, for the body armor, this one, I'm doing a little bit of a different paint job depending on which Chaos faction I'm focusing on. For all the weapon casings, as well as for the helmets and the armor pieces for the Tzeentch dedicated cult, I picked all those thin layers out in 2 thin layers of pavement paint by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. As you can see, I did the helmets, the chest armor, shoulder pads, shin guards, arm guards as well. Now, as for the guys on the right hand side dedicated to Khorne, what I decided to pick out for those were their weapon bodies, as well as their helmets, as well as some of their shin guards, as well as arm guards as well. However, I left their torsos alone because I want to paint those in metallic paint as well. So once all the details I want to be painted in black, I put 2 thin layers of pigment on. We're ready to go on the dry brush for the body armor. Now, when it came to the body armor for the Tzeentch dedicated cult members, what I decided to do is dry brush that in a thin layer of Anniversary Silver by Folk Art. It's a nice, beautiful, bright silver that you get your local Walmart for about 75 cents. I just did a quick dry brushing all over the body armor, as well as all the details I did in black to make it look like it's a little bit more worn down and weathered. As for the Khorne followers on the right hand side, I decided to dry brush their black elements in Anita's, in Folk Art's pale gray. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 75 cents as well, and that's just to create some detailing on those armor panels. And once we're done with that, the next thing we're going to work now is on some of the metallic elements. Alright, so the next thing I started working on, of course, were some of the metallic elements on these miniatures. Things like the body armor for the Khorne followers. I picked on 2 thin layers of gunmetal gray by Folk Art, which cost 75 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. As for the weapons for the Tzeentch level guys, I painted their weapons up in 2 thin layers of Anniversary Silver because I wanted their weapons to look a little bit more well kept and also well maintained their Khorne counterparts as well. At the same time, I also picked out some chainmail details that are available on both sets using Antique Copper by Anita's Acrylics. You can get this at your local Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents. So I picked up those chainmail details and that antique copper look. From there, the next detail we worked on are things like the fur coats that these guys are wearing, some of the animal pelts they have, some of the leather goods that they have as well as weapons and slings. And for those details, I just picked those out in 3 different colors. I use Anita's Acrylic, Moccasin Brown, as well as Territorial Beige by Apple Barrel Paint, as well as Apple Barrel Paint's Burnt Umber. Now, the 2 Apple Barrel Paints cost 50 cents at my local Walmart, while the Anita's Acrylic cost 65 cents at my local Hobby Lobby. And I just picked out all those leather goods that I wanted to have in 2 different colors, and that's basically what I did, is looked for all the leather bits around these guys as well, picked out those two thin coats of all 3 colors to create some variety. So things like slings of the guns, for example, the harnesses that these guys are wearing, the animal pelts these guys are wearing as well. And once I'm done with those details, next we got to do, of course, is a dry brush. And the color I use to dry brush all of the goods these characters are wearing is the same color, which is pale gray. And the reason why is because I want to create this kind of dusty kind of look, like these things have been faded and worn down by eons of time on the battlefields of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Now, some of the last few details we're going to work on before we work on the metallic colors are things like explosives, canteens, bits of leather they have still on their character, and that's what we're going to use for that. Now, for the grenades that we see on these characters, the frag grenades, we picked that in 2 thin layers of Holly Branch, which is a color I get at my local Walmart for about 50 cents. It's a beautiful, bright, vibrant green. I use it for all the frag grenades that these guys have on them as well. At the same time, I also use Apple Barrel's Khaki, which also costs 50 cents. I use this for some of the leather goods around the wrappings around their ankles, as well as their wrists for the bandages that they have to make it look like it's kind of soiled fabric. Then I also use Folk Art a little bit as well to bring out some of the details for some of the armor pieces these guys are wearing. At the same time, I also use Ripe Tomato as well as Mermaid Blue. I use those colors as well to pick up the larger things like the Molotov cocktails and larger explosive devices that these guys are carrying as well. And of course, I get all these colors from my local Walmart as well as from my local Hobby Lobby. So once again, we are going back to using our metallic colors now to finish off the guns and the weaponry that these guys are carrying. Things like Anita's Acrylic, Tree Aged Copper, Folk Arts Gunmetal Gray. We use Deco Arts Emperor's Gold for all the gold emblems like the cult icons and things of that nature. Cost 65 cents at your local Walmart. I also use Folk Arts Copper for all the copper pieces, as well as Bright Anniversary Silver to do some dry brushing on some of the weapons as well. And as you can see, pretty much I go through the entirety of these guys, picking out whatever details I want. Things like the Star of Chaos, I picked those out in gold. For some of the weapons, I picked out in either anniversary silver or gunmetal gray. I also use the gold for other chaos iconography spread throughout. Some other metallic details like the muzzles of the guns as well as some of the fuel tanks. I use copper as well as aged copper to those colors as well. And one of the last final details I use, of course, is I decided to use 2 base coats of lime sherbet. And what I decided to do for that one is I just put lime sherbet on the eye lenses for some of these characters to make it look like their eyes are growing with preternatural colors. I also used some lime sherbet to dry brush some of the frag grenades on these miniatures as well to create a little bit more depth as well as highlighting. And now that we're done with that very last detail, the last thing we need now is start working on the bases. So because I'm using these miniatures for Necromunda, I decided to carry on with my typical ash wasteland base. What I do is I paint the bases and the texturing in 2 thin layers of pewter gray. Now if you'll notice in this photo, some of the white undercoat is picking through the pewter gray. That is perfectly fine because I'm going to dry brush these with pale gray anyways. And once again, I'm just going to do a quick dry brush real fast with some pale gray by Folk Art to bring out some texture and some highlighting on the texturing on the bases as well. And now that we're done with the bases, the last thing we need to do now is an oil wash. So for my oil wash, I like to use Midwax Poly Shade Acrylic and Mission Oak Color. The reason why is because it costs 5 times as less as Army Painter Strong Tone and does exactly the same thing. What the oil washing does is a couple of things. The first thing that it does is that it seeps into the recesses of the miniatures and brings a lot of the details that we couldn't see earlier. Things like the individual tufts of fur, the gaps between the armor panels, the folding of the clothing, as well as the spaces in like their fingers and their flesh and such. It also goes down to the texturing of their bases as well. The second thing that the oil washing does is smooth out the transitions between our dry brushes as well as our base coats, and as you can see, that chalky appearance has now gone away because it smoothed out those transitions by blending those color layers together. And the last thing that it also does is that it darkens down the vibrancy of the colors that we use in the miniatures. As you can see, the colors are much more recessed and much more muted down. They're not as bright and vibrant as they used to be, and that's the reason why we use such bright colors when we paint up these miniatures in the first place. Now there is polyurethane mixed with the Midwax polyacrylic, so you will need to let this stuff dry and cure for 24 hours. When it dries and cures, you'll have a nice clear coat, protective coat all over the miniature to protect it from fading as well as weathering. The only problem, of course, is that it does have a high gloss finish, so you'll need to use some matte varnish if you wanted to actually bring down that the sheen of that high gloss. Which takes us to our second to last step, which of course is completely optional, which is to use a matte varnish spray. I like to use Krylon matte varnish spray. It costs $5.99 at my local Walmart. I just do a once quick over the matte varnish spray to mute down the vibrancy of that high gloss finish on the polyurethane. And that's pretty much the last detail we're going to work on before finishing up the bases. And the last thing we do, of course, is to rim the bases of 2 thin layers of Folk Art's Skyline. It's a beautiful grayish blue color I use for all the miniatures in the studio's collection for Necromunda. Just put 2 thin layers around the bases, and we are finally completed with our Traitor Guardsmen from Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress. And there you guys have it. This is the end result that we have, bringing our Traitor Guardsmen to a beautiful tabletop standard. And we actually have 2 different color schemes for these guys to add some variety to our miniatures as well. And by using all the materials from our cheapskate method, you're only going with a full-blown investment of $30.62, and that's assuming, of course, you're purchasing everything for the very first time. So that being said, let's talk about exactly what materials you need to purchase from Citadel as well as Army Painter if you want to do exactly the same thing with your miniatures that we did, except by using name brand paints. Alright, so these are all the colors that you'll need to purchase from Citadel as well as Army Painter if you want to bring your models up to a tabletop standard like we did, except by using their name brand paints. You'll need to buy Thunderhawk Blue, Nagaroth Night, Fulgrim Pink, Teclis Blue, Caliban Green, Luganeth Orange, Cyberite Green, Bugman's Glow, Cadian Flesh Tone, Morghast Brown, Baylor Brown, Slanesh Gray, Eshin Gray, Flayed Flesh, Baharoth Blue, Mephiston Red, XV88, Rakarth Flesh, Rust Gray, Ulthuan Gray, all those colors costing you $4.55, costing anywhere between 7 to 9 times as much as the cheap craft paints that I use from Walmart. From there, you'll also need to buy Aethermatic Blue, Brass Scorpion, Lead Belcher, Screaming Bill, Iron Breaker, Retributor Armor, as well as Astral Granite, and all those paints cost $7.80, which are about 10 times more than the metallic paints I use from Folk Art, and of course, the Astral Granite using for the texturing, which I just use wood glue and sand, which is absolutely free. Now, you'll need to buy a can of Corax White Spray for your primers, which costs you $17, a can of Munitorium Varnish if you want to have that matte finish, which will cost you $19.50, and if you want to do the Army Painter Quick Tone, Strong Tone, you'll need to buy a can of that for $32 for your oil wash. Now, assuming that you're purchasing everything from Citadel as well as Army Painter for the very first time, you're talking about a grand total investment of $214.10 to paint your miniatures the same way we did by using those name brand paints. And when you compare that against the cheapskate method of only $32.62, we end up saving you a grand total of $181.48 to paint up your teams of Traitor Guardsmen for Blackstone Fortress. So there you guys have it. This is how you can quickly and cheaply paint up your Traitor Guardsmen for Blackstone Fortress for less than $32 and saving you $181 at exactly the same time. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. You guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good for this week, guys. We'll catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.